Are we live?
Yes, we are.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the ProductTank Zurich and Bern edition. Super happy to have everyone in the chat, everyone on YouTube watching, and then hopefully lots more watching the recorded session. We have a very special show tonight, and yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead. So I'll be giving a short introduction about what ProductTank is. Hand over to my colleague Tanya. She'll walk you through who our special guest is tonight, and then we'll learn more of product discovery just in a bit. So for those of you who do not know who we are, now my slides are sort of have the beach ball of death at the moment. Anyway, for those of you who do not know who we are, ProductTank is part of the largest product community worldwide. You might have heard of Mind the Product. Well, product tanks are the regional versions of Mind the Product. We're located in hundreds of cities, probably near a city near you. And yeah, we host these regular product meetups. It's for product people, by product people. So hopefully you'll get exactly what you want, and you can expand your horizon and learn more about how to up your game in terms of product. My slides are hanging. You see
No worries.
anything?
No, actually, you're frozen too, but that's all right. I'm going to take over here. I think we have Teresa live here, so we don't need the slides. So we have the better version. So yeah, I'm super excited. We here at ProductTank Zurich and Bern, we're always trying to bring you the best and brightest of product people. After Marty Kagan, Gibson Biddle, and more, she was next on our list, Teresa Torres, very experienced product leader and discovery coach. She has helped hundreds of teams around the world to be better at product discovery, and now she also released a book, so we all have a chance to benefit from her experience, kind of Teresa in a box. You see the book behind her in the stack, and I have my copy here. And but today we have something better than Teresa in a box. We have her here live, and she's gonna give a little talk for us on the why and how of product discovery, and after that we have a little time reserved for questions. Teresa, the stage is yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So everybody, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today. I am going to talk about the what and why of continuous discovery. Hopefully my slides will get added here shortly. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, so just by way of a little bit of background, I do like to share that I've worked as a product discovery coach, and I've worked with teams all over the world. I've worked with teams in a wide variety of industries. Some companies as small as a 2-person founding team, other companies as large as multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. Part of the reason why I like to share that is I know that it's easy to think about discovery and think, oh, only the elite internet companies can do this. Only the Facebooks and the Googles and the Netflixes of the world. Whereas odds are I've worked with a team just like yours, and I want to encourage you to think about how you might be able to do this in your own organization. Because my goal is to identify practices that are sustainable in a lot of different environments, and to really help you look at how do I get started with this? How do I spend more time with my customers? So with that caveat, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to talk a little bit about discovery. We often talk about discovery in the context of delivery. So we talk about discovery as just simply the things that we're doing to decide what to build. And we often contrast this with delivery, which is the work that we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. Now, the reason why distinguishing between these sets of activities is become so important is because a lot of companies know to emphasize delivery, but we often forget to equally emphasize discovery. We're also seeing another shift in our industry where across both of these domains, we're seeing a shift from a project mindset to a more continuous mindset. On the delivery side, it's really easy to see what that looks like. A project delivery mindset, we used to ship software once a year, once every other year, stamped it onto a CD, put it in a box, and shipped it off to store shelves. Over the last 20 years, we've seen that change pretty rapidly to a more continuous deployment or continuous delivery cycle, where a lot of teams are releasing every week. Some are releasing every day. The very best are releasing multiple times a day. On the discovery side, it's a little bit harder to imagine what that looks like. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is really what does a good continuous discovery team look like? And really the big idea here is we're seeing teams make more continuous decisions about what to build, and they're including their customer continuously throughout that process. So I'm going to start here with just a definition of continuous discovery. This does come from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits, where I define continuous discovery as, at a minimum, weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product, where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, I know there's a lot here, so we're actually going to break it down line by line. I'm going to start here with this first line of weekly touch points with customers. This is really about finding that continuous cadence. So some teams make the mistake of, they set a goal of, we're going to talk to 12 customers. And at the end of the quarter, when they realize they haven't talked to anybody, they talk to 12 customers in 1 week, or they talk to 12 customers in 2 weeks. That's not really a continuous cadence. What we're looking for is consistency, week over week behavior. And the reason why this is so critical is that as product people, we're making decisions every day. Some of those decisions are big strategic decisions, like which customer should we go after, which outcomes should we pursue. Others are more daily decisions, like what do we label a button? How should this underlying workflow work? What does the underlying data model need to support? Most of us know that we need some customer input on those big strategic decisions, but we forget that even our daily decisions can benefit from customer feedback. And I'm going to give you an example of this. I want you to pick up your phone. I'm going to assume it's in arm's reach. And I want you to scroll through your pages and pages of apps. And I'm going to guess that every single one of you has at least half a dozen, if not a dozen or more apps that you were excited about at one point. That's why you downloaded them. But they didn't engage you over time. Something about them didn't quite work for you. They were missing a key feature. The workflow didn't quite match your mental model, or maybe it just simply didn't engage you over time. Why does this happen? We see this more often than not. And it's because as product teams go about making their decisions, they end up making decisions that don't work for the customer, and we end up losing the customer over time. There's a really good reason for this. There's a cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge. It suggests that as we develop expertise in a domain, we forget what it's like to not have that expertise. So how does this apply to the product world? Product people, we're working on our products all day, every day. We know exactly how our products work. We know where everything lives in the interface. We know what functionality is available. We know what order to do what things. We become experts in our products. Unfortunately, our customers are not experts in our products. And because of the curse of knowledge, we forget what it's like to not be an expert in our product, and we start making decisions that don't work for our customers. Now, fortunately, there's a really easy way to fix this, and that's simply to increase the frequency in which you're engaging with customers. I like to set a benchmark of at least weekly, but if this cadence feels really overwhelming to you, take a continuous improvement mindset to this. If you've never talked to a customer, find your first customer to talk to. If you're talking to customers rarely or maybe on a quarterly basis, try to get to monthly. If you're talking to a monthly, try to get to every other week, right? So take an iterative approach to reaching this cadence. This is going to help us overcome that curse of knowledge. The more often we talk to customers, the more likely we're going to see the gap between how we think about the product and how our customers think about the product. There's also another major benefit to this cadence, and that's that it's going to help us break the habit of only relying on validation research. What do I mean by that? Validation research is when we do all the work up front, and then at the end we validate, did we get it right? So what this might look like is we do all the design work up front, and then at the end we validate with usability testing, did we get the design right? Or on the delivery side, we do all the delivery work, and then we release it and we validate with the A/B test, did we build the right thing? Validation research is an important tool in our toolbox. We should do those activities, but we don't want to only rely on validation research, because we want to learn if we're building the right thing before we do all the design work, before we do all the delivery work. And so this cadence of engaging with customers actually allows us to get feedback much earlier in the process. It allows us to get feedback on what problems we're solving. It allows us to get feedback on half-baked ideas. It allows us to get feedback on pencil sketches. And this starts to unlock what I call a co-creation mindset, where we're getting feedback from customers early and often. And the major benefit of this is when we only rely on validation research, when we only get feedback at the end of the process, acting on feedback is very expensive. We have to redo design work. We have to rewrite code. We often get the feedback very late in the process where it's expensive to make changes. When we get feedback early and often, it's very easy to change a pencil sketch. It's very easy to change what problems we're working on. So adopting this co-creation mindset is really powerful. It's going to allow us to combine our knowledge of what's possible with our customers' knowledge of their own context and their own needs. Now, inevitably, when I talk about co-creation, somebody in the audience is thinking of one of two famous quotes. The first was by Steve Jobs, where he said, "Customers don't know what they want until we show it to them." The second was when Henry Ford allegedly said, "If I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse." What Jobs and Ford are getting at are that customers don't know what's possible. So many people interpret those quotes to say we shouldn't talk to customers, but I don't think that was their intent. Their intent was we can't go to customers and say, what should we build? Customers don't know what's possible. That's why they don't know what they want until we show it to them, as Jobs said. Instead, our goal when we're talking to customers is to understand their context, to understand their needs, to understand their pain points, and to understand their desires. And we're going to synthesize that knowledge with our knowledge of what's possible. And that's what's going to lead to better solutions. So this first line of weekly touch points with customers, our goal here is twofold. We're trying to overcome that curse of knowledge to make sure that we're making products that work for our customers over time. And two, we're getting feedback much earlier in the process when it's cheaper, faster, and easier to integrate that feedback so that we're developing better products for our customers. Now, it's really important the team that is building the product is the team that's engaging with customers on a weekly basis. And this is different from what a lot of companies do. A lot of companies have a centralized team that's responsible for doing research, whether that's a user research team or a market research team or a business intelligence team, and they're having that team hand research to the product team. If you have access to that type of research, that's great. Feel free to use it, but it's not in lieu of doing your own discovery. And that's because product teams work on their own cadence. They need fast answers to weekly questions. It's not possible for centralized teams to support the cadence in which product teams work. So we really want the product team who's building the product to get fast answers to their own questions. And this really starts with this idea of a product trio. A product trio is typically comprised of a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer working together from the very beginning to make good decisions about what to build. Now, I want to contrast this with what we've historically done. Historically, a customer talks to a stakeholder talks to a product manager, the product manager writes requirements, the requirements get handed off to a designer, the designer does the design work, and the requirements and the designs get handed off to the engineers for implementation. This is a classic waterfall model. It's also what we see a lot of agile teams do in 2-week sprints. They're still doing all these handoffs. They've just made the batches of work smaller. What's wrong with all these handoffs? We see two major problems. One is we get a ton of rework, and two is we see a lot of lost context. So let me talk about both. We see a lot of rework because as the product manager writes requirements, they're not always aware of design and technical constraints. So by the time the requirements make their way to the designer runs into issues with the requirements. We have to rewrite requirements to make the design work. By the time things get to the engineers, we see the exact same problem. We run into technical constraints. We see estimates that are far outside our budget, so we reduce the scope of the requirements. So we're rewriting requirements, redoing design work. We're learning to reduce these handoffs. This rework, we need to reduce the handoffs. We need to get these three roles working together from the very beginning. The other thing that we see is that when a customer talks to a stakeholder and a stakeholder talks to a product manager and a product manager talks to a designer and a designer talks to an engineer, the message gets distorted every step of the way, and the people building the product, the engineers and the designers, don't have a deep understanding of the original customer need, and we end up building the wrong stuff. We can circumvent both of these problems by reducing the handoffs. Our goal is to get this trio working together from the very beginning, collaboratively making decisions about what to build, and having this group work directly with customers to understand the needs that they're solving for. Now, most of us have more than 3 people on our team. We have additional engineers. Depending on our DevOps strategy, we might have QA folks or release managers on our team still. Depending on how we interface with the rest of the business, we might have data analysts, customer success folks, product marketing managers. Maybe we have the luxury of a user researcher embedded on our team. If you don't see your role represented here, I'm not trying to leave anybody out. We have a wide variety of roles that participate on product teams. There could be 50 different roles represented on this slide. Here's what I'm trying to communicate. With continuous discovery, we're trying to create a cross-functional approach to making good decisions about what to build. However, we're trading off speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. The more people involved in a decision, the slower we're going to go. However, the more relevant roles represented in a decision, the better decision we'll make. And so the idea of a trio is this is your minimum decision-making team. This is the team that at a minimum we want involved in every discovery decision because we know these are the minimum roles required to make a good digital product. However, the idea of a product trio can flex based on the type of decision that you're making and based on the roles available to you on your team. So you can pull in different roles based on the type of decision you're making. So if you're working on your go-to-market strategy, you're probably going to pull in your product marketing manager for that discovery work. If you're working on your underlying data model or how you're going to instrument your product, you might invite a systems architect or a data analyst to be a part of that decision-making and a part of that discovery work. If you have a full-time user researcher who is embedded on your team, your trio might become a quad. So don't think about this as a rigid concept that's excluding anybody. It's really about balancing speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making, and it can flex based on the context of your team and the type of decision that you're making. Okay, so we've talked through these first 2 lines. We're looking at weekly touch points with customers so that they're overcoming that curse of knowledge. They're synthesizing the customer's knowledge of what they need with the product team's knowledge of what's possible with technology. It's the trio that's engaging with customers on a weekly basis, making sure that we're able to make fast, effective decisions. So now in the second half of the definition, we're going to get into what's the trio doing when they're engaging with customers on a weekly basis. And these last 2 lines are going to work together. Our goal is to conduct small research activities. So we're not going to take our old project-based research methods and try to jam them into a weekly cadence. That's simply going to exhaust ourselves and burn ourselves out. We're going to change our research activities to be smaller and more continuous and more sustainable to do week over week. And our goal in doing those small research activities is to help us pursue a desired product outcome. So we're not doing research for research's sake. We're doing research to drive an outcome. And I'm going to introduce a visual to help us look at how do we do this? How do we stay on track? How do we make sure that our research is in pursuit of a desired outcome? And that visual is called an opportunity solution tree. If you've never seen this before, I'm going to walk you through how it works. It starts by defining a clear outcome at the top of the tree. Now, historically, most teams have not been managed by outcomes. We've been managed by outputs. You're typically tasked with a roadmap. Some of us are working with 12-month roadmaps. Some of us are working with quarterly roadmaps. Either way, we're given a list of features and asked to deliver those features on a timeline. That's an output focus. We're suggesting we know exactly what to build, and we're being asked to deliver those things on a fixed timeline. What we're learning is as the pace of change increases, as competition on the internet increases, as our tools allow us to act quicker, we're recognizing we can't predict the future. We can't know in January what we should be building in June, August, or November. And we got a really good lesson of this in 2020. If you started 2020 with a fixed roadmap in January, by March, I'm guessing you had to reconfigure that roadmap pretty significantly when the whole world had to respond to a global pandemic. We saw a global economic slowdown, and we saw a major shift in knowledge workers shifting from the office to working from home. Now, we're probably not going to face a global pandemic every year of our lives, or at least let's hope. But we do see constant change. We see new competitors enter our market. We see new technology unlock possibilities. Even our own code changes our customers' behavior. Because of this rapid change, companies are starting to recognize that we can't prescribe outputs. Instead, we want to start with outcomes. Here's how this works. We're saying we're not sure what outputs to build, but we know what impact we need those outputs to have, and we're measuring that with these outcomes. So outcomes are metrics, they're numbers we're trying to move. In my model, I'm looking at an outcome as measuring business value. How is your team creating value for your business? Usually this is derived from your business model. Now, throughout the rest of the talk, I'm going to use Netflix in my examples. I've never worked with Netflix. They don't sponsor me. People around the world are broadly familiar with how Netflix works. And unlike Facebook, there's not a lot of hostility towards Netflix just yet. So they're a pretty safe company to use in my examples. Okay, so if Netflix was setting an outcome, they're trying to shift away from outputs, focus on outcomes. They're probably going to start with their business model. They're a subscription business. They're going to look at what are the metrics that drive their business model. It's going to be things like increasing customer acquisition, increasing average monthly spend, increasing customer retention. So they might tell a product team, your job is to increase retention. That's a business outcome. I want to see that product team translate that to a product outcome. A product outcome is a behavior that occurs within your product, and it's something that you believe is a leading indicator of your business outcome. So in this case, the product team at Netflix might say, we believe that if you watch Netflix more, you're going to be more likely to retain your subscription. So they might set a product outcome of increasing viewing engagement. Once that product outcome is in place, we do want to be customer centric. So we're going to look at how can we create value for our customers, and we're going to do that by discovering opportunities. Opportunities are customer needs, customer pain points, and customer desires that are unmet. So we're looking at where can we positively intervene in our customers' lives, and we're going to limit this opportunity space to the opportunities that, if we addressed them, had the potential to drive our outcome. Now, this is really critical. At a lot of companies, customer value is at odds with business value. Our goal here is we're trying to align the two. So we're recognizing we have to create business value. That's what leads to viable products. That's what allows us to serve our customer over time. But we also want to create customer value. And so we're going to look at the customer opportunities that have the potential to drive our outcome. Now, in this world, outputs still matter. We do need to discover the solutions that help us address those opportunities. And we're going to use experiments or assumption tests to help us quickly evaluate which solutions have the potential to address those opportunities in a way that will drive our outcome. So when we talk about a product trio conducting two small research activities in pursuit of a desired outcome, I'm going to introduce two small research activities. One is going to help us discover opportunities. The other is going to help us discover solutions. So let's look at how do we build out this visual as we work to make sure that we're aligning customer value with business value. Again, it does start with defining a clear outcome. In an ideal world, this is a two-way negotiation between your product leader and your product trio. By product leader, I mean your executive, your chief product officer, your VP of product. If you're a really early stage startup, this might be your CEO. If you work at a really large company, this might be the general manager of your business unit. It's whoever can communicate how your team can create business value. The product trio is then doing the work to translate that to a product outcome that measures the behavior within the product. So in that Netflix example, the executive might be communicating increased subscriber retention. The product trio is translating that to increased viewing engagement. Of course, they need to do the work that as they drive viewing engagement, they need to make sure that it does, in fact, in turn, increase subscriber retention. Once that outcome is in place, we're going to look at our first small research activity that we're going to do on a weekly basis, and that's interviewing. We're interviewing to discover opportunities. So the purpose of an interview is to discover unmet needs, pain points, and desires. Because the opportunity space is always shifting, we're interviewing on a continuous basis to make sure we always have a rich understanding of what our customers need in this moment in time. Now, the reason why most teams don't interview on a regular basis is because recruiting is a legitimate barrier. It's hard to find a customer to talk to week in and week out. So what I'm going to recommend is you start by automating your recruiting process. This is going to sound magical, but I want you to wake up on Monday morning, look at your calendar, and see that you already have an interview scheduled without you having to do anything. This makes it easier to interview than to not interview. It sounds magical. It is real. I have worked with hundreds of teams helping them put this into practice. I'm going to share the first two strategies are the most common and the ones that I want the vast majority of you to focus on. I'm going to share a third strategy that's going to help in extremely difficult situations, helping to make sure that every single one of you has a place to start. The first is you can recruit people while they're using your product or service. So you're using your product as a recruitment vehicle. You can do this in a lot of different ways. The example you're looking at here is there's a pop-up that's as people visit this site, they're being asked to opt into an interview. When they opt in, they're being shown scheduling software that allows them to select an interview directly and put it on the product team's calendar. If you pursue this strategy, you have to think about it like a product funnel. There's going to be a lot of variables to tweak. Where do you show the message? How do you show the message? Who do you show it to? What do you ask for? What do you offer in reward? How far out into the future do you schedule? All of these variables will affect the candidate flow. So it will take a little bit of iteration and investment to get this working right. I will share the vast majority of teams that I work with are recruiting customers from within their product or service. This works extremely well for B2C companies, and it works extremely well for recruiting B2B end users. If you need to recruit B2B buyers or decision makers, I'm going to give you a second strategy. This is where you can define triggers for your customer-facing teams. By customer-facing teams, I mean your sales teams, your account management teams, your support teams, anybody who's already on the phone with your customers. You can define a trigger for them and say, if you're talking to a customer who's experiencing this need or this pain point, go ahead and put an interview on our calendar. In the first instance, you're using your product to recruit customers. In the second instance, you're using your customer-facing teams to recruit customers. In both instances, you're using scheduling software so that you do not have to be involved at all. The interview just gets put on your calendar. Now, I will share for the vast majority of you, these first two strategies are where you want to be focused. There are a small number of instances where it's extremely hard to get in touch with your customers. Everybody thinks their customers are hard to get in touch with, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm talking about instances where maybe your customers are Fortune 500 CEOs. They have very little discretionary time. Or respiratory ICU physicians and nurses during the height of COVID. People that are extremely hard to reach. What you can do is you can set up a customer advisory board where you build long-term relationships with a small number of customers. Now, I don't want most of you relying on this strategy. This strategy has a major risk. You're going to run the risk of building a product that works for a subset of your market and not your whole market. But there are instances where this is a good way to get started. If your customers are extremely hard to reach, you can start here and use these relationships to help you expand your pool of people to talk to. Okay, now that we know how to get a customer in the room, let's talk about how to ask the right questions. So the key to a good interview is we need to avoid speculation. This sounds obvious, but it's much harder to do in practice. If I work at Netflix and I want to learn about your Netflix behavior, I'm going to be tempted to ask you things like, what do you like to watch? How do you decide what to watch? Who do you watch with? What device do you watch on? These are all questions that are things that I want to learn, but if I ask them to you directly, I'm going to get speculative answers. There's a reason why. Human beings are not good at answering direct questions out of context. All of us suffer from cognitive biases that are going to interfere with how we answer these questions. What happens when we get a direct question is our brain generates a very fast answer. And so we give that answer. The problem is that answer does not necessarily reflect our behavior in reality. This is simply because of how our brains are wired. And so to avoid this, we want to spend time in our interviews collecting specific stories about past behavior. So I don't want to ask you, what do you like to watch? I want to ask you, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And I want to listen for answers to those direct questions. Where were you? Who are you with? What device did you watch on? But because I'm getting those answers in the context of a specific instance, the reliability of your answers are going to go way up. You're no longer speculating. The other advantage of collecting specific stories is I also start to hear needs, pain points, and desires. Opportunities emerge from customer stories, and that's what's going to allow me to start to map out the opportunity space. Now, opportunity mapping is a giant topic. We don't have a lot of time to cover it. What I'm going to tell you is that as you interview and you collect opportunities, you can use this tree structure to map out the opportunity space. It's going to give you the big picture view of how you can reach your outcome. I really encourage teams to prioritize the opportunity space and work with one opportunity at a time. Once you have a target opportunity, I want you to work with a set of solutions, comparing and contrasting those solutions against each other. This is not what most teams do. Most of the time, first of all, we hear a customer need and we immediately react to it. So we're not making a strategic decision about where we want to play. And when we react to that customer need, we jump to our first solution. And even if we're doing all the right discovery activities, we're framing our work as, is this idea good or not? And this is what decision-making researchers call a whether or not decision. This framing is problematic for a couple of reasons. First, it exacerbates a bias called the escalation of commitment. The more time we invest in an idea, the more we identify with it, the more we commit to it. In the product world, we see this. We often fall in love with our ideas. When we fall in love with our ideas, it exacerbates a second bias called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias says we're going to notice all the evidence that suggests our idea is fantastic, and we're going to completely miss the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. So this is a really critical idea. When we work with only one idea at a time, we don't get as much value from our discovery activities as we could. We fall into this trap of whether or not decisions. Again, there's a very easy fix, and that's simply we want to set up a good compare and contrast decision. We want to work with a set of ideas for the same target opportunity, and we want to say which of these ideas look most promising. This framing will trick your brain into seeing the pros and cons of each idea. This idea of comparing and contrasting is so important. I'm going to give you a visual to help you remember it. This is Usain Bolt. He was once the world's fastest 100-meter runner. I believe he's still the world record holder. If you saw him running around a track by himself and I asked you, is he fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. Is he fast or not? And I want you to ask, is he fast relative to what? Just like when you hear an idea and you're trying to evaluate, is this idea good or not? I want you to ask, is it good relative to what? And I want you to set up a compare and contrast decision. So with Usain Bolt, is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. What we're seeing in the photo on the right is a compare and contrast decision with a literal clear front runner. As we evaluate solutions, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a set of good solutions. These are all elite runners where there's a clear front runner, a clear winner. Now, the reason why most of us don't do this is we are still stuck in a project-based research world. We barely have time to work with a single solution and to test a single idea. So the key to unlocking good compare and contrast decisions, where we're comparing and contrasting 3 different solutions for the same target opportunity, is we have to change our research methods. We're going to take our 3 solutions, we're going to break them down into their underlying assumptions, and we're going to rapidly test those assumptions. Now I'm going to return to my Netflix example to help illustrate this. I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix customers, and one of the desires we heard over and over again is, I want to watch live sports. So here in the United States, we can get movies and TV shows on Netflix, but we can't get live sports. So if you don't have a cable subscription, you can no longer watch live sports. But because we know we want to set up a compare and contrast decision, we're going to brainstorm 3 ways we can solve this. The first is we're going to integrate TV channels that already showed live sports, and we're going to just integrate a live feed of those TV channels into the Netflix interface. The second is we could partner with sports organizations and license individual games and integrate those games directly into Netflix, the same way we license individual movies from movie studios. The third is we could say, we're Netflix, we're not very good at sports, let's find somebody who's already done this work. So Fubo TV has already partnered with a whole bunch of TV channels that show sports. Let's bundle our subscriptions together. Okay, we have 3 potential solutions. They're all fairly large. We certainly can't build all 3 and evaluate them with the A/B test. Our goal here is to take these 3 solutions and to break them down into their underlying assumptions. Now, this is not a new idea. Eric Ries wrote about testing assumptions in the book, The Lean Startup, which, by the way, came out 10 years ago, almost to the day. Again, the reason why we don't do this is not that we don't know we should do this. It's that it's very hard to see our underlying assumptions. So I'm going to give you some strategies for how to generate assumptions, and then I'm going to give you some strategies for how to rapidly test those assumptions. Our assumptions tend to fall into 5 categories. The first 3 are probably already familiar to you because this Venn diagram is becoming very popular. We make desirability assumptions about why people want our solutions and about what they're willing to do to get value from our solutions. We make viability assumptions about, should we build it? Is it good for our business? If we're an outcome-driven team, this is as simple as, why do we believe this solution will address the target opportunity in a way that will drive our outcome? We make feasibility assumptions. Can we build it? Is it possible? Do we have the necessary skills and abilities? Does the necessary technology exist? I'm going to add 2 more categories. We make usability assumptions. Can people find it? Do they understand it? Are they able to do what we need them to do? And we make ethical assumptions. Is there any potential harm? This is where we can look at what data we're collecting, how we're storing it, how we're using it. Do our customers understand it? It's also where we can look at social justice and inequity issues. We're seeing a lot of examples of products that replicate inequities in our communities, in our products. Most of these, I believe, are unintended consequences. We can avoid those unintended consequences by surfacing ethical assumptions. Now, knowing these 5 categories will help you generate assumptions. You can ask, what are the desirability assumptions we're making? What are the viability assumptions we're making? But it can still be hard to see our own assumptions. So what I recommend is that you use story mapping to help you generate assumptions. Story maps, if you're not familiar with them, I'm going to walk you through how they work. It's the yellow boxes on this slide. I want you to assume your solution already exists, and I want you to map out what your customer has to do to get value from that solution. So in this case, we're going to assume that Netflix has already done the work to integrate live TV channels into their interface. And in order for a customer who wants to watch sports to get value out of the solution, the yellow boxes represent what they need to do. They need to decide they want to watch a sporting event. They have to choose a streaming service. In this case, we want them to choose Netflix. They have to open that streaming service. In this solution, they need to know what channel the game is on, right? They have to be able to choose the channel, and they have to watch the game. The value of doing this is I can now go step by step through my story map and ask what needs to be true in order for my subscriber to take this step. So in the first step, they have to be a sports fan. In the second step, they have to know that Netflix has sports. They have to want to watch sports on Netflix, meaning they can't already have a good enough solution. They have to know what channel the game is on. We have to be able to partner with that channel. We have to be able to partner with that channel in an economically viable way. We have to be able to create a good viewing experience for live sports, which is very different from creating a viewing experience for TV shows or movies. The value of doing this, of generating these assumptions, is we can often test assumptions in a day or 2. It's much quicker than testing the whole idea. And assumptions differentiate our ideas. This solution will depend on a different set of assumptions than our other ideas. And as we rapidly test assumptions, it's going to allow us to collect, compare, and contrast data. I'm going to use this first assumption our subscribers want to watch sports to quickly give you 4 different ways you can rapidly test your assumptions. The first is we can prototype to simulate a specific moment. The key here is I'm not talking about an old project-based prototype. We're not prototyping the whole solution. We're prototyping just enough to simulate the moment in the story map in which this assumption occurred, and we're testing just this assumption. So in this case, I want to prototype the moment where someone's trying to make a decision about what to watch. All I need to do to prototype this, I don't actually need a pixel perfect production quality design. I could just give someone a list of options, movies, TV shows, and sports, and ask them, what would you like to watch right now? And I'm evaluating what percentage of people are choosing a sporting event. If I have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I can run this assumption test and evaluate results in less than 24 hours. It's a very fast way to collect feedback. The second way I can test this assumption is I can run a 1-question survey. Now, surveys get a bad rep, and that's because it's hard to ask a good survey question, but you already know what you need to know. We're going to avoid speculative questions. We're going to ask about specific instances in the past. So I'm going to ask, have you watched a sporting event in the past week? People are going to answer yes or no. I'm going to ask this question in the context of my product or service so that I can rapidly collect responses. Most teams can collect enough data in a day or 2 at most. Many can collect data in an hour or 2. This allows me to rapidly evaluate this assumption. The third way I can test this assumption is I can ask, are my customers already exhibiting the behavior I would expect to see if this assumption were true or false? What data can I look at? I can look at support tickets, customer feedback, sales opportunity feedback. I can look at behavioral analytics. I can look at search queries. In this specific assumption, I can ask, are customers already searching for sports? And I can evaluate what percentage do we have sports fans in our audience based on what they're searching for. These first 3 types of assumption tests, prototyping to simulate a specific moment, 1-question surveys, and data mining, are going to cover the vast majority of assumptions that you generate. I'm going to introduce a 4th type of assumption test for your feasibility assumptions. And for feasibility assumptions, we often need our engineers to do what we call a research spike. A research spike is a time-boxed activity where we're asking our engineers to investigate something specific. To make a research spike an assumption test, we need to start with a very clear assumption. I'm going to give you an example. If I'm trying to integrate a live feed of TV into Netflix, I might want to be able to show what's on right now. So I might want to know a title, a description, and an image of what's on right now. We might be assuming, our assumption is that that TV channel can provide appropriate metadata that we can show in our interface. So we might give our engineers a research spike where we say, collect 24 hours of event data and evaluate what percentage of the time we get appropriate data. This is helping us evaluate how hard it will be to build the solution, how much data management, how much massaging of the data do we need to do. That gives us compare and contrast data for our other solutions. It's also going to help us generate better delivery estimates when it's time to build the solution. Okay, we're assumption testing. We're breaking our ideas down into their underlying assumptions. Because assumption tests can be ran in a day or 2, we can run multiple assumption tests in a week. We run multiple assumption tests across different ideas. That allows us to compare and contrast our solutions. So we just covered a lot of ground. I'm going to do a really quick recap. We started at the top of this visual by defining a clear outcome. We then, once the outcome was in place, we looked at our first small research activity we're doing on a weekly basis. We're interviewing to discover opportunities. Once we choose a target opportunity, we're working with a set of solutions, setting up a good compare and contrast decision. What makes that sustainable is we're evaluating solutions not with big project-based research, but by breaking those solutions into underlying assumptions, and we're rapidly testing those assumptions. A good continuous discovery team is interviewing every week and assumption testing every week. That's what allows them to constantly have a deep understanding of the opportunity space and to quickly evaluate if their solutions will address those opportunities in a way that will drive their outcome. As they iteratively do this, they're finding solutions that address small opportunities. As they do that week over week, they're addressing more and more of the opportunity space. As they address more and more of the opportunity space, they start driving their outcome. Now, everything that I covered is covered in detail in my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. This book is not a high-level 30,000-foot view of how this works. It is a hands-on practical guide to help you put these habits into practice. It was designed for product trios to help you adopt a continuous cadence to your discovery work. It is available at bookstores around the world. I highly recommend picking up a copy. All right, I think we are ready for questions.
Thank you very much. It was very insightful. Thanks, Teresa. So I'm going to start with the first question. And what I really love about your work is that you don't deny that product work is messy, right? It's really hard to take these good decisions. It always looks very easy to look at this tree, and it looks easy when it's done, right? But getting there is really hard. So I think especially the opportunity space, mapping that out, you touched that briefly, that's really hard, right? So how do you start prioritizing, and how many levels of opportunities do I typically see at the beginning before I get to this very clear view that you just showed us?
Yeah, so with opportunity mapping, it really starts with conducting a good interview. So opportunities are going to emerge from customer interviews. So we got to make sure that our customer stories, so we got to make sure we're grounding our interviews in specific stories. And then the first step before you can map the opportunity space is really digging in and learning how to identify opportunities from stories, making sure those opportunities are well framed, doing that across a handful of interviews. And then once you've done 3 or 4 interviews, you can now look at the interviews the opportunities you're hearing in each of those interviews and say, which of these opportunities do we think have the potential to drive our outcome? Those get moved to your tree. And then the key to creating a good tree is coming up with the first good structure. And almost always that's going to be based on an experience map. So your top level opportunities are going to map to steps in an experience map. That's going to guarantee your branches are distinct. And then from there, how many levels do you have? It really depends. If you're getting really detailed in your interviews, which is what I want you doing, you might have multiple levels. If you're finding you don't have multiple levels, it's usually a good indicator you need to dive deeper in your interviews. And this is an iterative process. Once you map the opportunity space, it's going to help you see that you have gaps in your interviews. That's going to help you interview better. And then in your next interviews, you're going to start filling in those gaps. And then, of course, that's going to help you see even more gaps. And this back and forth between interviewing and mapping is going to go on forever, which is why this is a continuous exercise.
Absolutely. Perfect. So yeah, and from the tree that you showed us, it's also clear that it all depends on having a clear outcome set at the beginning. What do you do with teams that get multiple outcomes to work on? Has it ever happened to you, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, businesses have this sickness where we just believe that we can do more than we can. And so instead of making hard prioritization decisions, we give everybody way too much work. And so a lot of product teams, instead of given one outcome where they can focus and get the benefit of that focus, which is, I think, the purpose of an outcome, they're given 2, 3, 7 outcomes, which I think is insane. So if that's the situation you're in, you cannot run this process for multiple outcomes. It takes a lot of work to truly understand an opportunity space. So what I recommend is that you prioritize within your outcomes, that you pick your highest priority outcome, you do the best you can for that outcome, and then you just satisfice for the rest of your outcomes. Where you might do bits and pieces of this process, but you're not going to be able to get a rich understanding of the opportunity space for multiple outcomes. So even if you're asked to task multiple outcomes, I just recommend you do your own prioritization within those.
Okay, great. And we also got another question from our community that goes in the opposite direction. What do you do if multiple teams are responsible for one outcome? How do they work together?
Yeah, so every outcome can be split, right? So we can look at the outcome and say, what's the experience map that helps a customer reach this outcome? And then you can divide it by steps in that experience map. You can divide it by segment. So if you're trying to drive engagement, you could look at first-time user engagement or return visitor engagement, or there's a million ways to subdivide an outcome. And so if you have multiple teams working on an outcome, I recommend you subdivide it. That gives each team their own domain to explore. It gives each team more autonomy, and it helps each act as a truly empowered team.
Right.
So one of the questions that we got, like one of the highest requested topics, or the most concern that people have, is about convincing stakeholders and C-levels on, you know, working this way, the way you just presented. So what are the things that you can give to the people listening to this, you know, who are now just super pumped and super excited, bought all the books and reading everything about product discovery? Like, what are the things that they should be doing to increase the chances for them to work like that?
Yeah, so here's the reality. The vast majority of us are not being asked to deliver an outcome and given space to work this way. That's just the reality we live in right now. I actually don't recommend you waste energy trying to change your organization, because if you're an individual contributor, you're not likely to have a big impact there. A lot of us don't want to hear that, but it is the truth. Now, if you're in a leadership position, I'm going to give you a different answer. But if you're an individual contributor, here's what I recommend. Focus on your own work. Even if you're being tasked to deliver a fixed roadmap, if you can work backwards and start to look at what are the outcomes these items are trying to address, what are the customer opportunities these items are trying to address, if you can start building your interviewing habit and get more time with customers, and you can build these habits and build this understanding, you will build better versions of those outputs. So even if nothing in your organization changes, but you focus on developing these habits, you will do better at your job. The upside of that is once you start getting better results, other people in the organization are going to be curious about how you did that. And that's when you're going to have an opportunity to start influencing how your organization works. But absent of that, it's a theoretical ideological war that you have very little chance of winning. Now, if you're in a leadership position, I'm going to give you a little bit different answer. You are in a much better position to start to influence. But the answer is not that different. Do both. First, start with what's in your sphere of control. When people get interested, start showing your work. And that's the best way to influence.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of people just wrote that down. It's like, don't fight, just, work backwards and do the best that you can.
And there is a chapter in the book at the very end called how to bring, getting started, how to bring this to your organization that gives you some clear steps of just first start here, then do this, just to really help people. Most people are not working in the ideal context, right? So we have to do the work of how do we get closer and closer to that ideal context.
Great. I'm going to go with the opposite question. What happens if leadership is very excited about all of this and they want to start mapping out the opportunity space themselves? Because we were talking about having this tied to the team level, right? Opportunities at team level. Does it make sense to have another opportunity team, opportunity tree, a level higher on the company level, and then tie that back to the team? Or does it get too messy?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of companies try to create a company-wide opportunity solution tree. I don't think it works. I think that the tree is designed to help you identify the best path to a single outcome. Companies don't have single outcomes. They have lots of outcomes. There's two different activities I recommend doing instead. The first is you can do an outcome tree where you're mapping out, you start with your business model. Like every company, every for-profit company is looking at increase revenue, decrease costs. That's what drives profit. From there, you can look at your business model metrics. Those are inputs to increasing revenue. You can build out this outcome tree that helps you understand what are the outcomes that matter most, that helps you make sure your teams are working on the right things. So that's one activity I recommend doing across company level. And the second is experience mapping. You can create an experience map or a customer journey map that represents across your products, across the company level. And both of those are a lot easier to do across teams, and they can help you identify how to set outcomes and the context for those outcomes team by team. And then you can use opportunity solution trees at the team level.
Right. It makes a lot of sense.
I have one question. So there's, as product managers and as product people, we love a bunch of frameworks, right? Like we could do frameworks all day long. And there's so many very similar kinds of tools, out there that look a little bit like the opportunity solution tree, but are not quite, like impact mapping and things like that. So for all the confused product people like myself, what's sort of your tip in picking the right kind of tool once you have, like, do we need something in addition to the opportunity solution tree?
Yeah, this is a great question. I get it a lot. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I think the primary goal is externalize your thinking. There's a lot of ways to do this. You can do this with an opportunity solution tree. You can do it with experience maps. You can do it with impact mapping. Jobs to be done talks about jobs are hierarchical. That starts to look a lot like an opportunity space. I'm not very dogmatic about tools. I think that the key principle here is externalize your thinking. I will share one thing I like about the opportunity solution tree that I think you get with the hierarchical jobs that you don't necessarily get with impact mapping, although you can get it with impact mapping based on how you choose to impact map. So impact mapping tends to be this like free-form mind map, which is great because it makes it really easy to use. So if you're getting stuck with the structure of the opportunity solution tree, you can start with the impact map. That's like a good first step. But here's what I'll say. The structure of a hierarchical opportunity space or a hierarchical job space, what that teaches us to do is it teaches us to turn really hard, intractable opportunities into smaller and smaller pieces of work. And that's what really unlocks this continuous cadence, because we find small opportunities that when we solve them, partially solve harder opportunities. So we're not just focused on low-hanging fruit. We're not ignoring those hard problems. We're deconstructing them into small iterative pieces of value. And you can get that with the impact map. So I'm not criticizing impact mapping. If that's your preferred way of working, you can get that with the impact map, but it's not inherent in an impact map, right? Because mind mapping is free form. It's not necessarily a parent-child relationship. So that's the key that I think is missing from some of these less structured tools, is that you want to make sure whatever tool you're using, that you're bringing in this piece of deconstructing really hard opportunities and needs into smaller and smaller pieces.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think we're almost running out of time. Maybe one last question. What's next for you? What are the big opportunities on your own opportunity solution tree?
Yeah, so the first one, Dominic just called me to task on, and I'm working on it. I'm working on getting my Audible book out. I know many of you are waiting for it. That's actually been a big hurdle for me because I want to narrate it myself, and I don't really know how to do that just yet. But I'm getting better, and I will be doing it soon. I also, right after that, will be international translations for those of you that want to read the book in your own language. That is also coming. Those are two big initiatives for me in 2022. The other thing that I'm working on is right now we have online courses that help you put the habits into practice. We have a master class that introduces you to the whole framework. And then we have deep dive courses in 3 of the key skills. So defining outcomes, continuous interviewing, and opportunity mapping. We're working on courses on identifying hidden assumptions and on testing assumptions. So those are coming in 2022. Hopefully, I thought we were going to get them out this year, and we just had a lot of unexpected things come up this year. But really, here's my goal. My goal is to help whoever wants to work this way build skill and adopt this cadence. And so everything that I'm looking at and everything my team is looking at is how do we help you put this into practice? So that's what's in the near term.
Great. Thank you. And I think you got a little bit of your goal done today by reaching our audience. Thank you so much, Teresa. Hope to stay in touch and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, Teresa.